Prejean was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where she is a member of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Médée. She began her prison ministry in 1981 when she dedicated her life to the poor of New Orleans. Her broadcast appearances include 60 Minutes, NBC's Today Show, ABC World News Tonight, and Primetime Live, Larry King Live, The Phil Donahue Show, the BBC World Service Radio, National Public Radio's Weekend Edition, and Fresh Air, and PBS's Frontline, and on and on and on. She has won hundreds, literally hundreds of awards for her work, including at least 10 honorary degrees from colleges across this country in the last 3 years. And because of this audience, the World Methodist Peace Award in 2008. She's also served on the board of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty from 1985 to 95, and has been the chairperson of that board from 93 to 95. She's a member of Amnesty International, an honorary member of Murder Victims Family for Reconciliation. She has agreed to take some questions at the end of her presentation, which will be after the break. So please let's welcome Sister Helma.
This incredible journey, and you have to know how I started out. I'm writing right now, River of Fire, the spiritual journey to death row. I did not seek as a bona fide nun teaching in a parochial school to go to death row. It's just not the goal of your life. And so that awakening that happened and the journey and I keep coming back to the image of fire. And so the spiritual autobiography or story of coming to the chamber and being with people as they are being killed. And it begins, the prologue in the book begins, I watched a man be killed with fire one night. They pumped electricity throughout his body until he was dead. He was killed because he had killed, and it was all legal. I came out of the execution chamber, and there were no religious leaders there to protest the killing. It was all dark and it was all silent, but I was there, and I had seen it, and what my eyes saw caught my heart on fire, a fire that burns in me still. And now I will take you into the spiritual currents that pulled me to the killing chamber that night. And so it's all mixed up together, being a saint, being holy, being a nun, going and teaching the kids and loving it, always loving it. And then that awakening. I didn't know I had a life of privilege. And I didn't know when I became a nun that it enforced the life of privilege even more. Because now, with the Holy Sisters, you could ride the bus free. I mean, I had just received the habit, and I got on the bus to go to the dentist. And a lady comes from a seat in the bus and falls on her knees and kisses my rosary, the crucifix on my rosary by my side. And I'm just looking down at the lady. The bus driver waits, so she kisses my rosary, and what do you say? There's nothing to say. Like, thank you very much. Have a good day. There's nothing. But you're getting all this adulation and all this stuff thrown at you like you're a nun and you're so holy and all this kind of stuff. So you have to make your way through all of that. But the call was coming from the inner city. And I resisted this thing at first, that we were supposed to be involved in this thing called social justice. I don't know what's going on there. I think of a rosy world. I think that all the rules apply equally to everybody, that this is the United States of America. And so the sisters, though, there's fermentation, there's stirring the waters. Community is always that for us, that the waters get stirred. So there are sisters among us saying, we need to be standing on the side of poor people. And most of us are not involved directly with poor people at all. And I was doing retreats and working with young women, and I kind of had my little niche, you know? When you got your niche, it's hard to have it displaced, I guess, was underneath a lot of this. But the debates were fiery, and I would get up to the microphone and say, Well, the poor have God. They have everything. I mean, Jesus said the poor will always have with us. And I said, we are nuns. We are not social workers. So what is all this getting involved with justice? Not by bread alone do people live. Teach people about God, and then, no matter what their suffering is, one day they'll have a wonderful crown in heaven. And you can only make those kind of statements, as I did, by being separated. And if there is one thing that happens in this country, it is the stratification of the way we live, the neighborhoods we live in, the schools we go to. Even churches are set geographically so that you look around at church and you go to church with people just like you. And how radical the gospel of Jesus was, crossing lines and boundaries. So I woke up because I heard a talk and I was ready. I had been struggling. I had been agitated about this social justice. And when I woke up, that's the first part of the journey in Dead Man Walking, about waking up to justice. So I was swept along, and we all are. We are all swept along. And it is a tremendous grace or enlightenment to wake up. And I did. And I moved into the St. Thomas Housing Projects. And African American people became my teachers. For the first time, I was with my neighbors who were my peers and who were teaching me about the other America. I've been in Atlanta for the last couple of days, religious leaders organizing to fire up the churches to end this death penalty. And Billy Neal Moore talked to us. He was on George's death row. He had done a murder, and he confessed it. He called up the police and said it was a robbery. It all went wrong. I murdered this man. I killed this man. He was just eaten up with remorse. He said, come get me. I did it. And he writes to the victim's family, I killed your father. I killed your husband. I am eaten alive by what I have done, and I don't expect you to forgive me because I can't forgive myself. And it was the most amazing thing that happened with this African American family, who writes back to Billy Neal Moore. And as that journey progresses, when it was the pardon board hearing in Georgia, which never gave a pardon to anybody, that family brought people in on buses to say to them, don't you kill Billy, he's our brother. It was such an amazing thing. It had never happened before. In the law, that if you were mentally challenged, you couldn't be executed. And so they were going to have a state examiner come to give this man, whose name was Jerome Bowden, a test. And Billy is trying to tell him, Jerome, don't pass that test. Because if you show you're competent enough, then they're going to kill you. They call it the cure that kills. These psychiatrists that get involved with mentally ill people, getting them sedated, and the cure that kills. But in this case, because Jerome, the state troopers in a car on the side of the highway had written the confession for him, Jerome Bowden never had a chance. And Billy was really trying to help him and say, Jerome, don't pass that test. He said, you don't know what it's like, Billy. All the time I've been in school, I never could pass tests. And they laughed at me, and I was always a dumb one. I'm going to pass that test. And Billy said, please don't pass that test. He got a 71 on the IQ test. The cutoff line was 70. He got, look how you quantify life. He got a 71. And the state of Georgia killed Jerome Bowden. And when you're going to be executed, they put you in a special, it's the death uniform, actually. And he said, hey, Billy, look at my new clothes. It had like a little stripe along the leg. And when Jerome Bowden was killed by the state of Georgia, it was so horrendous. When they strapped him in the chair, he thanked everybody for taking such good care of him. And the Georgia legislature was the first in the United States after Jerome Bowden to say we cannot kill mentally challenged people. It was the first state to do it. And in that killing chamber, which of course you will never see, is the gurney in the middle and a well with bright lights on it. The inverted arms of the gurney, which is an inverted cross, which you cannot escape from. And on one side are where the witnesses for the state of Texas, one-way glass, nobody can see their faces. They look down on the gurney. In the witnessing chamber over to the left, raised up a little bit above to look down on the person, is where the victim's family is going to send a representative to watch the person be killed who killed their loved one. And in the other witnessing place is the one that looks down right into the face of the person on the gurney. And it is where mothers stand with their hands against that glass to watch as Texas kills their child. That is what we call justice. I'm going to tell you something. The death penalty in this country, which we have been doing for about 30 years, is 99.6 political symbolism, is what the death penalty truly is. Because when people are running for office, what's the easiest way to capsulize how tough you going to be on crime? Well, you go for the ultimate. Well, I'm for the death penalty. And if you're not, well, then you point to your opponent and say soft on crime. That started, the law and order thing started under Nixon in the 70s and through Reagan, and we have been governing by crime for the last 30 years in this country. And right under the death penalty is incarceration of human beings, 2.3 million incarcerations of people, 2/3 of whom are in prison for nonviolent crimes, for drugs, or women who have forged checks and are separated from their families and put into exile. Segregated, the bleakness of segregated society. Somebody's written a book, Michelle Alexander, and she calls the drug laws the new Jim Crow. And you look at who's in the prisons, and 1 in every 5 young black men ages 20 to 29 are in the prison system. So as we have not dealt with the welfare of society, of the pockets of poverty and where the schools are terrible, we build the prisons. We're the biggest incarcerator in the world. So human rights is a journey. And when we're looking at things from the outside, it doesn't seem to be much of one at all, huh? They did that crime, they deserve what they get, and let's be done with it. But I learned from Amnesty that human rights are inalienable. The United Nations Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which Eleanor Roosevelt helped form, and we are waiting backstage for the opera of Demi Walken to begin in San Francisco. Do you know this, Jake? And there's a plaque on the wall. That is where the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed. Did you know that? I'm looking at the plaque, and we get ready to do the opera. I'm going, this is where they signed it. And it's universal human rights, inalienable, because you're a person, which means that governments can't give human rights to people for good behavior, and they can't take human rights away from people for bad behavior. And those human rights, there are a number of them, but Articles 3 and 5, everyone has the right to life. Think of the arrogance that we think. First, we could set up a court system that we're going to be able to distinguish the worst of the worst and who deserves to die and who deserves to live.